back to the second half of the undergraduate research program for Jewish Studies. We're so excited to see everyone here, and I'm sorry I was teaching, so I only caught the tail end of the keynote, but it's really great to see everyone here. This panel is about Judaism and Jewish culture in America, and I'm really excited for the talks. I'm going to ask all the participants to, just as you begin, introduce your year and your major and what class this emerged from, where this came from, so that people know what you've done and where this came from, and your college actually as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing everyone. So I'm going to announce everyone first, and their names of their titles, and then they'll come up and do it. So Alexis Sargent will be speaking first. She'll be talking about the Shoah on stage, Broadway musical representations. The Shoah on stage, Broadway musical representations of the Holocaust and Jewish persecution. Then Daniel Baum will be speaking on Constitution Street, My Grandfather's Story. Rachel Morof will be talking about looking at changing Shabbat observance in Michigan over the past 50 years. And Jordan Robinson will be speaking on BBYO, Jewish youth groups, and the effects on Jewish teens. So I'm really excited to hear everyone. Oh, and I should say, I'm Kirsten Fermaglich. I teach American Jewish history.
Take a picture of all of you together.
Okay.
I think you followed me somewhere. I'm going to regret not taking a picture.
We'll do it later. We'll do it later. But, and I should say, I'm Kirsten Fermaglich. I teach American Jewish history. I'm in the history department and the Jewish Studies program, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody. So go ahead, Alexis. Sure. And I'll say, speak for about 20 minutes, and
Okay.
if it goes on, I'll let you.
Yeah, it goes great. Hello, everyone. I'm Alexis Sargent. I'm a senior social relations and policy major in the James Madison College. I also have a minor in women's and gender studies, and I'm really interested in violence against women work. And I also have kind of minors in musical theater and music. I will not be fulfilling them, but they were so that I could be in certain programs at MSU over my 4 years here. Yeah. So I took this research came from my senior seminar class with Professor Amy Simon. I am not Jewish, but I always had a really large fascination with the Holocaust as a student. I told the story in our class that when we read Yellow Star, which is a book, I think it's fiction, but a girl who is telling about her time in the Holocaust through poetry. I asked the librarian at my elementary school or middle school to give me all the books on the Holocaust because I was really interested. So yeah, I was really happy to be able to take the course, and I got a lot out of it, so thank you. So yeah, it's called The Shoah on Stage, Broadway Musical Representatives of the Holocaust and Jewish Persecution. There's my slide that I just added. So American Musical Theater. When I was starting this class, I really thought about how I had come to understand the Holocaust. Other than the classrooms, one thing that really came to mind for me was that I had learned about the Holocaust through musicals, which is crazy. But in our class, seems crazy, but in our class we talked a lot about the American memory of the Holocaust and how U.S. individuals learned about the Holocaust and what that really means to us through learning about that, and what it means like historically and through contemporary times. And so that was one avenue that I really learned about the Holocaust, which I thought was really interesting, and so I decided to take further through some research. So in Spamalot, it observes that you don't succeed on Broadway if you don't have any Jews, which is obviously a joke. But what posits that humor is that Broadway is literally all Jews and always has been. Jewish American immigrants and their children created Broadway and the American musical that we know today. And so these are just some famous Jewish musical theater artists, and many of them are crazy famous. Like Alan Menken, if you've heard any Disney musical song that you know, he wrote it. And then also some like amazing people like Leonard Bernstein, Desmond Sondheim, Barbra Streisand, people that just are cultural icons in the United States and internationally.
Was that Phil Mormon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry I didn't get them all.
All right, you're forgiven me.
So one quote that spoke with me is, the sons and daughters of the Jewish immigrants have a foothold of sorts as they establish themselves as the forces behind a litany of blockbuster musicals. So Broadway's golden age. From the 1940s to late 1960s, Broadway was in a golden age, which was really marked by innovative staging, magnificent costumes, emotional storylines. But this was also a post-war time, which is what our class really focused on, was the post-war right after World War II. And so during this time period, there were 4 musicals that I focused on, which was The Sound of Music, Cabaret, Fiddler on the Roof, and The Producers, that had some more direct mentions of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, and others more in the background. And I'll talk more about that. And then so, to speak a bit about those, the musical synopsis and production team's intent of Holocaust themes. So first, I talked about The Sound of Music, which was by Richard Rodgers, Oscar Hammerstein, and Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss. So it's based on the memoir of Maria von Trapp. Most people probably are familiar with the story. But so it's set in Austria, and so I really talk about how The Sound of Music includes swastika symbolism, Nazi characters, and Nazism, but the Nazi storyline is very much in the background, and there's a complete absence of Judaism or anti-Semitism. For example, when I was presenting this to my class, everyone had seen The Sound of Music, but so many kids said, wait, there's Nazis in that? And I said, yeah. And then I showed pictures, and they said, wow, that's so crazy. Like, and then Cabaret, this was by John Kander, Fred Evan, Joe Masteroff, and so this really shows how Germany is transitioning from the beginnings of Hitler's totalitarian regime and the rise of the Nazi Party. And so it's showing really realistic scenes from Christopher Isherwood's books of Nazi reality happening in Berlin. And then also like the Kit Kat nightclub, which describes the horrors happening outside of the walls of the nightclub. And so the plot really centers around Nazi violence, and it shows it very directly. And Jewish and gay characters in Berlin who are trying to ignore that the Third Reich changes are happening, but these really begin to interfere with their lives. And so Hitler is unnamed, but Cabaret tackles subjects of Nazism and anti-Semitism really head on. Did it change? No. Okay. And then also Fiddler on the Roof, which is a fun story. But it's based on Tevier and his daughters and other tales by Shoah Malcolm. And it centers on Tevier and his 5 daughters. And throughout the story, it's really about how Tevier is trying to maintain his Jewish religion and cultural traditions as outside influences that invade upon the family's lives. So I really talk about how like the Jewish shtetl community that Fiddler celebrates was destroyed by the Nazis. And so when this was first brought about, many Jewish individuals in the US were not as vocal about speaking about the Holocaust as is told by some scholars, but some also refute that. And then later, it was very evident to critics who were seeing Fiddler on the Roof that how the Holocaust was so central to the story and how it really shows that this was taken away by the Holocaust, what this is shown in the musical. And then also Mel Brooks, The Producers, which is just a crazy, crazy musical. But it's about these Broadway cons, and they're trying to make a musical called Springtime for Hitler. And it's all about, like, supposed to be a joke about Hitler and the Third Reich, which we think would be awful, but it's funny. And the humor of the show draws on obscene accents and caricatures of homosexuals and Nazis. And there was also a film. And so I say why musicals are important in Holocaust remembrance. Broadway musicals concerning the Holocaust have been historically disregarded by the academic community. There has been a direct absence of scholarly response to looking at the intersection of these things. A few scholars such as Jessica Hillman argue, but scholars such as Hadia Diner, I'm not sure if I said that correctly, Hadia Diner, and Peter Novak, who write about the American Holocaust and Remembrance, make no mention of musical theater. And then scholars who study theater in reaction to the Holocaust don't mention musicals. So I thought this was really interesting intersect that isn't really talked about. And so I argue in my research that the disregard of studying the intersection of musical theater and the Holocaust poses a problem. Musicals are a unique genre of cultural productions that that function in the larger project of Holocaust American memorialization, as they did for me. And due to the revival culture of musicals, how musicals will be on like a Broadway cast for a certain amount of time, and then they can be brought back with a new creative team. And you see in different iterations, they really show the culture that's around them that they're being presented in. And so I argue that because of this revival culture, musicals rejuvenate discussions of the Holocaust in different time periods. And they can be used as a tool to understand America's changing sentiment towards the Holocaust over time. And so I also, at the beginning, I spoke about how you won't succeed on Broadway if you don't have any Jews, which is a joke. But that the point that Jewish American remembrance of the Holocaust was a really important piece for Jewish Americans. Musicals were a really important part for way for Jews to memorialize the Holocaust. And so Broadway musicals with themes of the Holocaust and Jewish persecution stand as another genre of memorialized projects by post-war American Jewry that many scholars such as Hajia Diner and others are now really bringing to light more recently. And so some instances of this, in The Sound of Music in 1959, the stage version contained deliberate references to the Auschwitz, Nazi characters and pro-Nazi sentiment during World War II. There is a scene in the original musical that there's a song completely directed at the looming pro-Nazi environment in Austria that's entitled "There's No Way to Stop It," and the words Nazis are included in the song. And there's also scholars that are looking at that the original team behind The Sound of Music wanted more imagery of swastikas and Nazis than the producers allowed. But due to the social environment of the time period, financials producers advised against clear Nazi characters and symbolism to be kept off stage, which is really interesting. And then Fiddle on the Roof, the creative team recognized their role in the space of remembering the shtetl community that was taken away from American Jewry. Many lyricists said it's not really an accurate depiction of the shtetl, it's more like having false memories or a sense of longing, and they really saw that they wanted to resurrect the shtetl world and give it additional life on stage for other people to be able to see and commemorate. And then I also talked about how in the post-war period, not only were there Jewish playwrights, composers, lyricists, and performers, but audiences were also enjoying full-blown musicals about the Jewish people. So American denial of what happened to the European Jewish population pervaded during and after World War II. And in the late 1940s, Americans became aware of these atrocities. But there was kind of a double vision that some scholars we studied in our class talked about, where they were being shown these videos of what happened in the Holocaust, really awful stuff, but it was really hard for them to actually conceptualize what had happened because it was so terrifying and so awful. So I think that musicals offered a really powerful medium for Americans to understand the Holocaust in the way they could conceptualize it through music, images, characters, and feelings that Americans are often very comfortable with. So this was my main thesis. Jewish Americans' construction of the Broadway musical parallels Jewish navigation of U.S. culture in the post-World War II era. The musical became an artistic outlet for Jewish musical theater artists to consider their people's experiences. From 1950 to 1967, Jewish American musical theater artists chose to incorporate Jewish narratives of persecution and the Holocaust into Broadway musicals. American Broadway musicals with themes of the Holocaust and Jewish persecution are formative in American awareness and education of Nazism, the Holocaust, Jewish persecution, and Jewish remembering of the Holocaust. So these are some of my research questions. But really what I was looking at is what constitutes a productive form of Holocaust memory in musical theater. So what I was really looking at as my criteria was, did it effectively communicate narratives of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism to the American public? Did it incorporate conversations of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism in mainstream conversations in American society? Is it formative in American awareness and remembrance of Nazism, the Holocaust, and Jewish persecution over time? And so I was looking at the representation of the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and Jewish persecution, the emphasis of Holocaust themes and songs and major plot points discussing the Holocaust. So I'm going to show a bit examples of those. So I said that a productive form of Holocaust memory equates to the ability to effectively communicate narratives of the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, and Jewish persecution to the American public. So that's my main crux. So musical content. So these are some examples of how musicals have included instances of Nazism and that individuals were able to learn those from seeing them on stage or in movies. So The Sound of Music discusses the Auschwitz before and after it occurs. Nazis represent an encroaching evil on the beloved Austria. The captain's anti-Nazi political views are very clear. He says, "I'm not a German, I'm an Austrian," during the conversation about the looming Auschwitz, which was a Nazi invasion of Austria. And the musical as a whole really offers a message of how easily Nazism can spread. Many people are really familiar with how Rolf is a Nazi at the end of the play, but he's also like a love interest of one of the daughters. And so instances of this really show that like normal people, such as in the 1959, a Sargent gives a Heil Hitler to Rolf. And so, and then you see Maria gasp because she's like even Franz, who is the servant. And so it just shows that Nazism was able to get to everyone in Austria, and that it was a whole society really accepting this. And then Fiddler on the Roof. The tradition, song lyrics depict Jewish religious and family morals of keeping a kosher home, men being the prominent family leaders and women acting as caregivers, and Jewish individuals praying to God and reading the Torah in the shtetl community. Throughout the fear, through the fear the community lived under and the injustice portrayed against the Jewish characters, anti-Semitism also really presents itself in the musical. There are direct scenes where there is violence that's shown to characters, and there's also scenes about the narrative of looming Jewish exile. So one character says at the very beginning of Act 2, "Horrible things are happening all over the land, pogroms, violence, whole villages are being emptied of the people, and it's reaching everywhere, and it will definitely be reaching here." So it just shows the audience the anti-Semitism that these Jewish individuals and communities are experiencing. So musicals as productive forms of Holocaust memory and impressionable presentations. I talk about how musical theater has the exclusive ability to create live, intimate conversations to audience members. John Bush Jones talks about how musicals can foster in their audiences a feeling of shared communities, and that in theatrical settings, people become receptive and important lessons about life can be imparted from the stage. And mainstreaming discussion. So musicals function in the larger remembrance of the Holocaust. So musicals created a space where non-Jewish Americans could be involved in Holocaust remembrance with American Jewry. And musicals' messages of Nazism, the Holocaust, and Jewish life and Jewish remembering of the Holocaust in the post-war period reached millions of Americans with several religious and ethnic backgrounds. So this is a lot of what I looked for my research. I looked at reviews that happened during the years of when the musicals were first shown on stage. It looks like the Mac is going to fall asleep soon because it is dying. One New York Times critic, Vincent Carandi, stated that that The Sound of Music was an operetta so sugar-frosted that the Nazis would have looked out of place as tiny attendants on a wedding cake. So we can see that American theater goers, even in 1959, were realizing the role of Nazis in The Sound of Music story. In cabarets, if you could see her third example, the original lyrics in 1966 stood as, "If you can see her through my eyes, she wouldn't look Jewish at all." But because of angry outcry from the Jewish community of the time period, the line was quickly changed to, "If you can see her through my eyes, she isn't a miskite at all." Or miskite. Okay, sorry. Yeah, Yiddish for ugly. So just there were these very anti-Semitic Jewish tones that were within the lyrics, and these are lyrics that people perform and sing and have in their head from day to day. And having references like that is very direct. And next, musicals is formative in American Holocaust sentiment over time. Broadway was able to reveal cultural Holocaust sentiment. So Broadway musicals can be used as tools to reveal American sentiment and comfortability around Holocaust subjects at the time that they were presented. And musical film, national tour, and Broadway revival renditions reveal changes in the Broadway American attitude towards the Holocaust over time. So I talked about the producers, which was, a lot of my research was from Professor Fermaglich. So thank you so much. And the 1967 film, Mel Brooks, The Producers, received very mixed reviews, especially among American Jews. In the time period of the mid-60s, Jews were still anxious about anti-Semitism, fearful of fascism, and just beginning to express rage publicly about the murder of millions of Jews during World War II. Jews found the concept of a Jewish-created play glorifying Nazis tasteless and possibly dangerous to American Jewry. However, less than 50 years later, when the 2001 production of The Producers came to Broadway, it became a remarkable success due to a different American sentiment regarding Jews in the Holocaust. So this just shows really differently how, not that long, I guess 50 years, less than 50 years, we see that there's just such a different cultural reaction to the Holocaust and making fun of Nazis in mass media. And then Cabaret. In 1966, Cabaret was noted by critics for its radical presentations of anti-Semitism in pre-Holocaust Germany. Richard Watts wrote, "From the first time there is a rising undercurrent of decadence and vulgarity that was preparing the way for the ease in which a brutal racial insanity," so no anti-Semitism was discussed, was able to take over country. So I think that's really interesting that he would use racial insanity and not talk at all about Jews or anti-Semitism in his rhetoric. But then you see a large change in 1998 Cabaret Broadway revival. Director Sam Mendes, who won a few Tonys for that, chose to include deliberate narratives of concentration camps and the Holocaust into his production, where the 1966 Kit Kat girls of the original production were described as round in the script. Mendes wanted to cast bone-thin girls who appeared sickly, and he really wanted to get the idea of skeletal inmates of the concentration camps to come, which was mentioned by a New York Times critic who was writing about it on opening night. And in the 1998 revival's final scene of the cabaret, the MC wears the clothes of a concentration camp prisoner, with the insignia of two of the victim groups of the Holocaust, the yellow Star of David to represent Jews, and the pink triangle to represent homosexual victims of the Nazis. So the difference between 1966 is that this rhetoric really wasn't used. And then in 1998, it is so direct. And we see that this director, Mr. Mendes, thought that audiences would get these visualizations of the different groups of the Holocaust. Now that people really recognize the yellow Star of David and the pink triangle, that these represented different victims, which is really fascinating. And then so this is about the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening to it. So I say musicals produced in the post-war era of 1950 to 1967 were production forms of Holocaust memory. And then also as these shows continue to be shown worldwide, such as Fiddler on the Roof and The Sound of Music are currently touring nationwide. In 2014, The Sound of Music was made into a live television production in which 44 million people tuned in. The last performance of Cabaret on Broadway was in 2015, but there are conversations about it being brought back in a few years that I was just reading. Yet as musical revival culture goes on, the musical's overt narratives of anti-Semitism and encroaching Nazism will advertise on Broadway marquees in the near future, just with different twists into a new generation of theatergoers. So in the age of increasing Holocaust denial, attacks on the American Jewish people, and rising anti-Semitism, venues that promote American awareness of the Holocaust are more important than ever. And with each curtain call, American memory of the Holocaust evolves through musical theater. So these are many references of my primary sources, because that's how Professor Simon had us look at our sources. And then these are some of my secondary sources. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciated my time taking a class with Professor Simon. Thank you.
Question?
Yeah.
We good? Okay. So, let me preface this by saying, this is a very emotional topic for me. This is about my grandfather's story. He passed away 2 years ago. So, it's not going to be like an academic PowerPoint. I do have a PowerPoint, but I want this to be as, inclusive and discussion-based and engaging, to talk about topics that are difficult for me, and I imagine difficult for many of you, those of you who knew or still unfortunately know Holocaust survivors, or those who were impacted by that terrible event. So what I want to do first is read just the back cover of this book, which was written by the family, or one daughter of the family who adopted my grandfather, or rescued him, I should say, in 1935. He was born in Gladbeck, Germany, which is in the North Rhine-Westphalia region. It's a coal mining town. His family were descendants of Poland and came to Germany for economic coal industry reasons. In 1935, both he and his stepbrother were granted visas to travel to the United States. They wound up in New York and then in Detroit. And this family adopted him. And so a couple of years ago, one of the daughters of the family wrote a book about her experiences living with a German refugee child. And I think this surmises pretty well the presentation I hope to give. So it's dated the 25th of July, 1935. Dear Isaac, why did the letter I sent you from New York come back? Address unknown. Maybe you and your family were able to leave the country. That would be good. I'm going to be living with a family named Silver in Detroit, Michigan, until Hitler is killed and the Nazis are in jail. The Silvers have a boy named Bernard. He is called Bernie. He is like a baby. He is not even 11 yet. I don't think I'm going to like him. The Silver family has so much food, but the food is so strange. Mrs. Silver lets Bernie choose because she thought I am just like him, a twin, and I would be sure to like what he liked. I am not like him. I'm afraid to tell them how old I am. Maybe they would send me back to the home so they could get someone Bernie's age. They had a huge pan of something called macaroni and cheese. In the first place, the cheese was orange. Did you ever hear of an orange cheese? Please write me wherever you are, your friend Wilhelm. So Wilhelm is the pseudo character from my grandfather. So she wrote it as, and I'm going to pass this around, as letters to the family. So in the end, in 1938, both my grandfather's parents and his younger brother were deported and did not make it out alive. His youngest or second youngest brother, so there were 4 boys, did end up getting on a kinder transport and made it out. So this is a book that basically speaks to the experiences from the family in Detroit through vicariously my grandfather, and there are letters in there, and yeah. Okay, so I should introduce myself, right? That's probably a good thing, yes. I'm Daniel. This is how my project went, by the way. Very scattered, my brain works like this. I worked with Professors Fermaglich and Simon in the fall of 2018. I recently graduated in December. I'm going to law school in August, so I'm in this weird limbo zone, but I'm happy to be here to share what I did. The crux of the project was a visit to Germany last summer. I studied abroad in Israel and then went over to Germany and actually got to meet people in the city of Gladbeck, the archivist. We went through various records, and I'm going to go through those in a little bit. But basically, it was an awesome time to actually look at primary resources as opposed to just secondary resources, which we did, which complemented the work that I was doing. But it was the crux of the project really was going there and just diving head in. I don't speak German, so it was kind of intimidating at first, but it was a trip. It was a trip. Okay, so just to give a bit of a background about the project. Again, it was inspired by my maternal grandfather. It's the combination of his loss as well as the current political climate we're in, where refugee and asylum and migration seem to be trigger words. Why, I don't know, but these seem to be heated political topics. And so seeing what had happened to my grandfather and seeing what has happened today, not necessarily saying they're analogous, but saying that there are similarities and parallels which I like to explore, which kind of served as inspiration to conduct this project. 3 questions I posed when I began this project. How can I tell my grandfather's story? The answer, I can't. He's the only person that can tell his story. He's no longer with us, and when he was with us, he never, maybe seldom, but very rarely talked about his experiences. We assumed it was too hard. Really, that book is the only piece of evidence we have to try and put his story together, but there was no him sitting us down and saying, this is what happened to me. We don't blame him for that. We don't hold him accountable. We try and understand. But what I wanted to do for my generation and for future generations is to try and explore his experiences and try to put together his story, because we surmised it was just too difficult for him to talk about. The second question I asked, again, was how does my grandfather's story resemble and differ from refugees' experiences today? Not saying, again, they're 100% similar, but there are very scary parallels that I think do merit exploration. Thirdly, what areas of my grandfather's story allow for further academic exploration? And that's where the secondary sources started to come into play. Okay, so I divided this research into 7 different categories. I tried to do that as a goal of contextualizing his life, because he started, born in Gladbeck, Germany. He ended, he died at the age of 92. He was an optometrist with a successful practice and had 6 grandkids. And so it's very important, it was important in my mind to try and separate as best I could. And these were created categories. He did not condone these. But, okay, so then again, the heritage tourism, which I'll get through in a second, and then the literature. There are 3 main categories that I tried to explore using secondary resources and information to try and help me tell the story. Okay, so so the product of this research is a website, and I'll get to it, and I'll show the website, but I'm not a graphic anything. I can't even figure out how to put on a charger, but I'll show that in a second, and please don't judge me or hold me accountable for the website. It's not so good. But basically, this is the actual, can you guys see this? Okay, this is the one of like 6 or 7 archive rooms that hold an abundance of records. I'm just gonna pass out a couple of them if you just wanna take a look. A lot of it's in German, but some of it you can try and see. But basically, the German record keeping, that notion that Germans are good at record keeping, is absolutely true. They are. I was just blown away by the impressive nature of how in depth they explore past history, even the things that are very painful to talk about. The reason for the city archivist connection, one of my cousins had reached out to her and visited. I don't know if is anybody familiar with brass markers in Germany? So in certain towns in Germany, there is a group that researches and actually makes these brass markers that have the names of former Jewish tenants or homeowners to denote where they lived and where they were deported from. School children in Gladbeck participated in this, so this is kind of the report about my family's experiences in Gladbeck and the brass markers that stemmed from that. Let's see. So this is actually the brass markers in front of the home that the family was deported from in 1938. It was, I don't know why I'm smiling there, because inside I was dying, but it just was unbelievably weird to be at the place where the last known family in Germany lived. But this is, in the middle is me with the city archivist, Katrin. This is her informational poster at the location where Kristallnacht took place in Gladbeck. And this is the hospital where my grandfather was born. Okay, so these are in some of the handouts, if you will, but basically just the record. For instance, if you guys see here, the family changed their name from Garfield to from Garfinkiel to Garfield. If you can see that on the notes, but if this says Garfinkiel, does everybody see that cross? That X. That is basically saying that they're either died, they left, they're no longer with us, and in this case, you can see right. I believe it's this one where it says "an America," like they denote where the person's living, what their race was, what their ethnicity was, what their nationality was, where they were born. I mean, the records were just unbelievable. In the middle here is a card that is kept for each home in Gladbeck. They have an actual index card that says this is who lived here, and again, all that information. The top left picture here is a picture of the blueprint of that home we just looked at in 1938, the last home they lived in. It's like a flimsy piece of paper that is very, very cool and tries to at least depict what it was like before they left. In the bottom here is, again, a list of all the family members, and it's easier to see there, but basically the crux of this was just being able to see actual documents in person, and I should do a shout out, the Cussy Scholarship helped me finance some of the way to get to Germany, so yes, thank you to them, I guess. And so, okay, moving on. Okay, I'm gonna jump to this, okay. Okay, so this is the website, which I would not share, but it is a website I tried to create as a mechanism of publicly sharing this information. And so, as I mentioned previously, the three categories, one of those is, for instance, the life he lived, so beginning in 1923 when he was born. This is a picture of him and his family. This is my grandfather, the brother he came here with, the brother that went to England, the other brother was not born yet, and these are his parents. Just trying to at least tell his story the best I can. And so let's see if we can. The part I really want to focus on, which makes his story, I think, stand out, is his experience as a refugee child. So he came here without his parents. As I mentioned, only he and his stepbrother were granted visas to come here. So they were basically unaccompanied minors traveling to the United States in 1935. That in and of itself prompted me to look into refugee and rescue resettlement programs writ large from the American perspective. Why didn't the United States do more? That was a question that swirled my mind and still does to this day. Why were only 1,400, give or take, children in this situation granted entry into the United States? 1,400. So questions like this helped to facilitate the research and facilitate the presentation, or the project, I should say. And I can get into more of, I'd rather not just spit facts and figures out at you because we can all look those up, but I'd rather kind of want to stimulate some discussion on why this was the case, or at least trying to make connections to today's environment. Okay. Another interesting aspect that I should mention that at least is interesting to me is his role fighting in the war. Not only was he afraid of heights and served in the Air Force, which is kind of funny, but he was, not knowing what had happened to his parents, he got back into that zone, into Germany, to fight the people who ended up killing almost everybody he knew. So if that isn't chutzpah, I don't know what is. I mean, that to me is one of my fondest inspirations of anybody I know. He came here not speaking any English, and that book kind of talks more into that. He had to learn all the nuances of American culture and you name it. But after high school, he enlists in the United States Air Force, served as a B-52 bomber. When he died at 92, he developed Alzheimer's and dementia. He would constantly murmur, and so this was one of the things he would talk about. He would constantly murmur 55 missions. We would say, what do you mean 55 missions? He served 55 missions over France and Germany, bombing the enemies. So he also received badges and ribbons and the like. So I mean, this was really one of the parts of the project that I just found. I mean, he's a stud, first of all. I'm biased, I'm kidding, but he's really a stud. He's if you would, not going to get emotional, but if you would have met this guy, you would have been like, wow, he's a trip. He was a trip. But part of that, and part of why I am so in awe of him and continue to be, and imagine I will be for the rest of my life, is the choices he made, right? He lost his family. He could have become a bum and just didn't try and advance himself, but at every stage in his life, up until getting Alzheimer's and dementia, he fought like hell. I have never met somebody in my life who fought as hard, physically, mentally, socially. This guy fought. Not even just in the war, with every aspect, he fought. And so that, to me, will always be it's synonymous with my grandfather fighting. He fought. And so that's kind of, again, part of this project's inspiration. So how am I doing on time?
5 more minutes.
Okay. So a little bit going into Gladbeck. Again, I spoke no German, never been to Germany, never been to Europe for that matter, but it was a very formidable experience in trying to just navigate myself. I got 2 speeding tickets on the Autobahn, so go figure, right? So did I, but little
That's a
there is,
lie.
and 2, not 1. So yeah, going to Germany was awesome. I saw the home he was born in. This is a coal plant that was first for the town. I just want to jump to, okay, we saw these. This is a forest. What they call a forest is like a rec area with former castles and tennis courts and parks and the like. This is a World War II memorial, World War I memorial, excuse me. This is the English tutor. This is actually what I probably want to end with. This to me is the most telling part of what I learned, and I didn't even get into the secondary sources, but this woman was born and raised in Germany. Had never, I don't think she's been to America, but she was an English teacher, so she helped translate some of the work with the city archivist. And when we were walking by the Kristallnacht area where the books were burned and where Katrine put the flag or put her poster, she remarked to me, she goes, and something I'm quoting here, I'm trying to put together what she said, but basically, these are the instances in which we try and forget. So that was very telling. Okay, what does an ordinary German think about what had happened? And the last thing I'll say about her is when we were leaving, she thanked me. She was the tutor, she was the translator, she was donating her time, but she thanked me. And I said, for what? She said, because you came back. With everything that happened here, you came back. And very, very, very few of Gladbeck's Jewish descendants come back. And I thought that was so interesting because if we don't start researching and we don't start trying to tell a story, even if it's hard, how can we learn from that? So that was one aspect of this. Yeah, it would probably be weird to start talking about today's world. So I don't know, I'm going to stop here, but yes, it was a crazy project, very fun, and would like to explore it more, but go to law school, so that's kind of next. But thank you. I'm sorry for being so scatterbrained. That's all I wrote. So thank you.
Shabbat observance changing over time.
Can I use my
Yeah, you're probably. Let's see if we can get through. It's a. Does she need it?
I think I just,
Oh.
that's where H reminds me. Awesome. All right. Hi, I'm Rachel, and I looked at changing Shabbat observances in Michigan over time. So I focused on Lansing and Metro Detroit families, just to explore some research within the rituals of Shabbat. So my research question was, how has the rituals of Shabbat changed over time? I was curious about how my grandparents, who were Holocaust survivors from Europe, came to Metro Detroit and how they had instilled the importance of Shabbat in my family. I was curious to know students who were raised in observant or non-observant homes when they come to universities, how do they choose to spend Shabbat? And then really seeing if there was a difference between the Metro Detroit community and the Lansing community. I was curious to see if material objects had a specific influence and how you remember Shabbat. And I conducted this with literature and oral histories. So what I thought I would find is that Michigan Jewish Shabbat rituals have become less about tradition and more about being together with friends and family over time. So the methodology I used, I did the oral histories, I did background questions on participants. So the bolded questions are the questions that everyone got asked. And for example, it's how did your parents celebrate Shabbat and how do your kids celebrate Shabbat today? What's your favorite tradition about Shabbat? Most of the people that I interviewed, I had a built relationship with already, so it was just getting insight on something that you celebrate every week, but you don't really know much about in their personal lives. So the people that I interviewed was Rabbi Aaron Bergman from Adat Shalom, he's my rabbi, Rabbi Joseph Krakoff, Beverly Wiener is right here, and her husband David, Michael Serling himself were family friends, so it was very nice that he was able to answer some questions, and then my uncle Michael Solars. The literature that I used was Adapting to Abundance by Andrew Weissman, The Wonders of America. Hines. Sorry, cut that out. The Wonders of America by Jenna Joslet, and then Annie Pollan's work of The Working for Sabbath, and then Vanessa Oakes' What Makes a Jewish Home. So there were 6 subjects that I interviewed, and this was all exploratory research, and here's a look at some of the literature. So Vanessa Oakes focused on the artifacts and the rituals that make up a Jewish home. That includes the family members, the gender roles that are set, the material objects that are used in a Jewish home. For example, having a mezuzah in your home. The conversation with this was that the importance of artifacts and how they make a Jewish home feel like a Jewish home. From her text, I learned that her work as a religious studies scholar focused on the importance of material artifacts and people's understandings of a material home. This prompted my asking the subjects about the material objects that they use in regards to Shabbat and Judaica. These Jewish artifacts and materials are used for different symbolic reasons for everyone, and it enhances their purpose and meaning behind this tradition. Jewish signifying objects have a presence that fill the room with literal Judaica or with a spiritual feeling and connection and your emotion to Judaism. So next is Adapting to Abundance by Andrew Hines. So he looked at Jewish immigrants and them coming into America and how they assimilated through consumerism and through advertising. So this focused on European Jews, like my grandparents themselves, and there was a change in how the Sabbath and how they celebrated in Europe into America. So it started to turn into a shopping day, or you would go to work on Saturdays to provide for the materials to celebrate Shabbat. And it was just adapting to an American lifestyle, which I thought was really interesting. So this secondary literature focused on the importance of consumerism and just assimilating to this new American culture. It shaped the questions and how I asked my interviews because a handful of my subjects' grandparents did immigrate, or parents immigrated from America and from Europe. So this affected them firsthand. I did ask how they remembered Shabbat and how their parents had celebrated Shabbat, just to get a better understanding of how Shabbat had changed from European traditions to American accommodations. When I did speak to people, I didn't see consumerism, but I also didn't ask it specifically. So that's something that I can fix for the next time. But I did learn that Eastern Europeans adapted to this culture, and I didn't see examples of advertising from people specifically or how their parents had consumerism. It was just more of how they felt in their home when coming to Shabbat wasn't as strict as it was when they were in Europe. And it just helped me get a better understanding of American culture. All right, The Wonders of America by Jenna Joslet. That looked at American Jews and how they practiced Jewry in their homes and their cultural identity. So when Jewish immigrants came to America, women wanted to support consumerism. So they purchased items, if you picture a magazine, they wanted their home to look like that magazine. So what that means is that you have to be a little more elite, a little more wealthy, and that's what these advertisements were targeting, is so that you could have the quote-unquote perfect Jewish home. By the early 20s, fewer than 20% of American Jews were attending a Sabbath service of any kind, and it dipped even lower as the generations went on, which shows that doesn't mean you're not celebrating Shabbat, you're just going into a Sabbath itself, the results were lower. So she also focused on gender roles and how it's the policy of Shabbat. So women are shown to put their work in by preparing a Sabbath meal while the men are out working and making a Jewish table for when you come home. And this inspired me to look more closely on gender roles today with Shabbat. These advertisements were used and it just showed that it targeted women in sisterhoods, right? Because if you're part of that group, you would see the consumerism within that. That's what I found from Jenna Weissman-Joslet. Oh, the last one. American Jews now turned to celebrate a holiday as an every once in a while approach, rather than as a holiday that requires attention every Friday. And then lastly, Annie Pollins, this was working for Sabbath. She focused on New York Jewish immigrants in the 1900s, and she showed that they were able to observe Shabbat and adapt in a new society. She focused on how the men convinced themselves that if they got other people in their family to do work for Shabbat, such as the cookings and preparations, that they were still focused on Shabbat. This time it was much about being with the family and that transition. The literature focused on how the shifting of families and the use of an entire household can still celebrate Shabbat together as long as they're keeping the day holy in some way. The breadwinners were the ones that were making the money, and they bought the goods to make Shabbat Shabbat. So as it was seen, this Shabbat is caused like the making of the money to celebrate, which can be ironic. And Shabbat was a family activity, and the different gendered household roles had changed with American assimilation. So the oral histories that I conducted, this one's Rabbi Krakoff. He's 48 years old, and he's from Metro Detroit. Both of his parents were born in America, so we focused more on how he celebrates Shabbat today rather than the immigration aspect, because it wasn't applied to him. So both of his parents were Reform and non-observant, and he went to college and found his own identity, and that's how he got connected. Today he has 3 children, and so I was curious to know if he grew up if he wanted such a religious household. Do his children today, when they're off in college, still observe? And they do. They do observe Shabbat and stay connected to their Jewish identity. So he always celebrates with his kids in full observance. And the artifacts that he uses to celebrate Shabbat are the Kiddush cup, the challah board, challah, and a challah cover, and of course the candles. He also said that he has Jewish art decorated in his home, such as his ketubah and a mezuzah as well. He said that it's a day of rest and it's family time, and that's why it's so important to him. And when asked about how to celebrate Shabbat, he said that it has changed over his lifetime. He said that it has progressed to become more modern, and mostly people don't follow Shabbat the way their parents did. Next is Rabbi Aaron Bergman. He's also from Metro Detroit. His father was from Europe. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he grew up Orthodox. And his mother grew up in Detroit from Russian immigrant descent, and he has 4 daughters. So it is a large family. And so when I asked about how he celebrates on Fridays, he says they bring the candles, they say hamotzi. It's a very comfortable setting. And it's very important for him to celebrate with his family because they are so large that it meant that that was a time where they're all together for at least one night of the week. So whether you have Friday night plans because things come up, you are home for dinner and then you're off to go do what you want. It wasn't forced to be Shomer Shabbos. So he connected with the Pollins work because it was the different ways of these historic events and how he was raised to be really religious, but he transitioned to still having the values of Shabbat, but changing to a modern time. So he would go, his parents would go to work on Saturday and would just adapt to this tradition. And his favorite part is the blessing of his daughters. I know I've...
No, you're doing fine. I just can't have you to check. You're fine.
Okay.
Don't forget.
So Michael Serling, he's 74 from Metro Detroit. His parents are American and his mother was non-observant, but his father was Orthodox. So they did celebrate Shabbat, and his father just focused more on the ritual aspect rather than the religious aspect. He was not observant in college, even though he was raised to celebrate Shabbat. But when he went to Israel, that's when his feelings really changed. If he's home, he does light the candles. He has siddur. He puts out a siddur. He puts on the kippah and a challah plate, and uses his great-grandfather's Kiddush cups. He said it's important to be with friends and family. So I thought that this was really interesting, that he doesn't carry any coins with him on Friday. That's just his reminder, Friday and Saturday. It's his reminder of connecting to God. So although he may not be in services or he may be out of town and not celebrating in a official practice, that's his one thing, that he doesn't carry coins, and that's his reminder to the holiday. And if he's not home, it's being with his friends and family. That's been a common theme, is that you're with your friends, you're with your family, whether you're at services or you're lighting the candles or not, you're with the people that you want to be celebrating with as a reminder. He said that the observant people do the same ritual that they did 100 years ago, but it's changed over time. So the conservative community has changed, while the Orthodox community's rituals have stayed the same. And his favorite tradition is the candles. And then Beverly Weiner's right here. We never got to meet face to face, but it's nice to meet you. This is, your husband sent me this photo. It says iPhone lock screen. And so it got cut a little bit, but it was really nice. So Beverly is 77, she's from Lansing, and her husband David is 79, also live in the Lansing area. So if I miss anything, please correct me. But your grandfather was religious, and your father was non-observant. Your mother was the one to keep up the Jewish home, which shows these gender roles throughout Shabbat. You would have new dishes during Passover, etc. Having a father that believed in the upholding of these customs of Shabbat was important, and you weren't obligated to stay in the house during Shabbat, but it was important to focus on your arts or your studies. So you lived in a half Americanized, half Jewish custom household, which is showing this adaptations. David's parents were American, but his grandparents did immigrate from Europe, and he went to a religious Jewish school. When asked how they celebrate Shabbat, Beverly said that she likes the candles, always have certain foods that are cooked, such as chicken and soup and challah. And her kids occasionally do celebrate Shabbat, but it's important that they are together with friends or family, and they are active in the synagogue here in Lansing. So their favorite tradition is being with friends and family. And then how my family celebrates Shabbat. So I focused on interviewing my uncle, Michael Solars. He's 66 from Southfield. He's probably the most conservative of my family, and they actually transitioned from a conservative synagogue to a Reform temple, just because that was the easiest way to get all of his family to come, which is that accommodating and being with family. His family came from Europe, and although they are conservative, they do religiously celebrate Shabbat. There are like 2 more grandkids that were added, so that picture's not updated. But with the busy family, with everyone from the East Coast to the West Coast, they do get on the FaceTime and they say the prayers together, which is really important. And then my family, it was never really something that was like told. I just wanted to come to Hillel. I've been to Hillel every Friday for the past 4 years. My brother was the same. I just like the lighting of the candles and the being with my friends and family, and just sitting down and having time to reflect and be with your friends, and just not have any stress on anything. So my overall findings were that the customs and rituals of Shabbat have changed over time, that Jewish American immigrants do value the traditions behind Shabbat, and American Jews today celebrate by being with family. The common theme that I found here was the lighting of the candles. So it's moving forward with tradition and with family, and it's showing that the family's timeless. They're always going to be there, and the symbolism of lighting of the candles is the first thing that came to people's minds when they thought of artifacts that are associated with Shabbat. Overall, the Jewish literature gave an in-depth understanding of this overview of American Jews and the Shabbat ideas and artifacts. And that is my research. So, Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah. Alrighty, hello everyone. So thank you for staying the entire time. I know it's been a really long day. But my name is Jordan Robinson. I'm currently a freshman from the Metro Detroit area, specifically West Bloomfield. So my research actually stemmed from the Religion Nonprofits 185 class taught by Professor Van Wieren. It was a really interesting class considering that's what I'm going into is Jewish communal nonprofit leadership. So I'm really excited to start exploring that path, and I got to explore that path and start that exploration in this class. So my research was kind of divided into 2 sectors, I guess you could say. The first one is, I guess I'm trying to prove a point of what BBYO does to teens and the impact that it makes on its teens, and why teens continue Jewish life, leaving the organization, going into college, or their next steps, things like that. But then the other point is, what are the Jewish leaders doing in our area, in our society, to really influence teens and ensure that they're continuing Jewish life and traveling to Israel and working in the Jewish communal field. So just to give you some background data, I did a couple I guess you could say, research questions. I asked a bunch of research questions to people who participate in Jewish youth groups across the United States, not just specifically BBYO, and not specifically in the Metro Detroit area. It was people all across the United States. So the first question that I posed is how you engage with the Jewish community post-bar, bat, or b'nai mitzvah. And the results, while I did enjoy seeing the results, they weren't totally what I wanted to see. So 59.1% of the participants agreed that they felt the need to feel engaged with their Jewish community post the bar or bat mitzvah experience, but also 33% said that they did not feel that they need to be engaged. And while it's only 33%, it's 33% of teens that we still want to be engaged with the community. So some of the questions that I posed to myself and that I posed to you are, what does this say about our leaders in the Jewish community? What are they doing to the Jewish teens, and what experience are they posing to the Jewish teens? And what does this also say about the well-being of our Jewish community? What is the current state of our Jewish community? And what does this say about the teens' mindset after their bar or bat mitzvah, and what they're thinking about the Jewish community? So another question that I posed to them is, in your opinion, what youth group do you think is the most popular in our current time, in our current state? So I posed NIFTY, the North Federation of Temple Youth, NCSY, BBYO, USY, Young Judea, and then there were some other results. But as you can clearly see here, 94.6% of the results indicated that BBYO was the most popular youth group. So then I posed the analytical questions of, what is BBYO doing that is yielding all these participants? Why is it making such a big impact across the United States, and you'll see in the presentation globally as well? And what is BBYO offering that other Jewish youth groups are not offering? And what does each youth group offer that sets themselves apart? Obviously, each one is distinguished, but what are they doing to make themselves distinguished? So I'm going to dive in a little bit as to what BBYO does. So this is BBYO's mission, and this is what their values are. BBYO spreads across 42 countries, including North America and around the globe. What they do is they strive to offer affordable and amazing experiences that you can take away, and you can bring that throughout your entire high school career and even your college career, and as well for the rest of your life. So that's pretty much what their mission statement is summed up. Here's kind of the aspect of BBYO is kind of a flow chart because BBYO is so complex. So it starts out with BBYO and the organization itself, and it also stems off of the Friends and Alumni Network. Additionally, once you come down from the whole aspect of BBYO, you have the International Order of the Aleph Zedek Aleph of the B'nai B'rith Girls. So the AZA being the Jewish fraternal sector for the guys, and the B'nai B'rith Girls, which is the girls' high school sorority sector. And then from there, you have the international boards of AZA and BBG, the ones who kind of oversee all of the movements, the initiatives, pretty much anything that goes on across the entire movement. You have the international board stemming off of that. Additionally, the international boards plan International Convention. International Convention is the largest gathering of Jewish teens at any one moment that happens every single year, so that's kind of a cool record that BBYO gets to set. Additionally, the International Order, they provide the global campaigns and summer program experiences as well to further develop your Jewish leadership. Stemming off the International Order, you have regions and councils, so pretty parallel to the International Order, and then additionally the chapters. So the chapters are under the regions and the councils, and I'll explore more of that once I get further into my presentation. So this is the BBYO movement worldwide. The white areas indicate where BBYO communities are already established, and the green ones are where BBYO communities are not established. Some of the pending communities that are currently going through the charting process right now are Melbourne, Australia, Shanghai, China, Mexico, and Cuba. So those are places that are currently going through the process to get a BBYO community grounded there. But before, I would say about 10 years ago, the goal of the globalization of BBYO was to just get its name out there. Now it's to build a foundation there and really open up the Jewish life there for those communities that haven't been established. So it's a really cool thing, and like I was talking about earlier for that international convention, you have people in all these established communities that fly out to the location in the United States where international convention is and experience that with everyone else in the United States. Talking a little bit about the chapters. So the chapters are pretty much the foundation of BBYO. This is where you go and find your home, quote unquote, pretty much. That is, it's really kind of a homey feel, I guess you could say, to it. But chapters are named after either Hebrew word or a significant Jew who really made an impact globally and has been dead for at least 6 months. So following the name of the chapter, you'll have either the name AZA, BBG, or BBYO to indicate if it's a male, female, or more recently a gender-inclusive chapter. And the chapters will have colors, they'll have a mascot, so it's really kind of a representation of the people that are in that chapter. They have their own personality and they have their own culture. So it's a really great thing. So some of the examples of chapters, and these are the ones that are in Michigan, are Max Fisher AZA, named after the philanthropist Max Fisher, Ahava BBG, Ahava meaning love in Hebrew, or Hatmanah BBYO, our first ever gender inclusive chapter, and only one of 6 gender inclusive chapters around the entire world. So going off of councils and regions, so councils and regions are pretty much what all the chapters are made up of. So all the chapters within that area are comprised into councils, or if it's a bigger area, it's considered a region, or it could be considered a country. But with the councils and regions, they have a regional board, which is comprised of all the teens in that area elected by their fellow peers in there. And from there, they plan conventions for all the teens to go to. They plan leadership conventions. They plan region-wide programs. So it's a really cool thing to be a part of regional board. I was a part of my regional board my senior year, and it was just a phenomenal experience. And then going off of the international order. So the international order is comprised of AZA and BBG, very similar to the regional and chapter aspect, but the international order is where pretty much every single person involved in BBYO comes together to take part in initiatives, which I'll speak on in a moment. They come together to international convention where they learn about the new initiatives and learn new leadership skills and find out what the global Jewish community is up to pretty much. So it's a really great experience being a part of the international order. And they kind of say once you're a part of the international order, you're a part of it for life, because you continue to be a part of it through the Friends and Alumni Network and get involved in becoming an advisor and staffing these conventions. So it's a really great experience being a part of the international order. Diving into specifically the International Convention. So International Convention is comprised of over 5,000 teens, over 200 volunteers from across the world who learn about all the different campaigns. So at International Convention, they launch new campaigns for teens to take a part of. Additionally, there's a bunch of different participant experiences that you can be a part of and really make your mark on International Convention. So you can vote for the new international board. You can apply to have your chapter's program be showcased throughout International Convention. You can apply to sing at International Convention. You can apply for international awards. So there's really a bunch of different member experiences that you can have. This year it took place in Denver, Colorado, so a very prominent Jewish community. And each International Convention, they have a theme. So this year's theme was Our Turn. Really showcasing the idea that it's our turn to make an impact, our turn to lead the Jewish community to new heights. So BBYO, pretty much the programming year it takes place during an academic year, but it doesn't just stop there. They have member experiences that you can take part of. They have CLTC, the Chapter Leadership Training Convention, so kind of starting off small, learning how to lead your chapter, a 12-day immersive experience. They also have International Kolos, learning about the Jewish side of BBYO and learning about Judaism and who you are as a Jew. But they also have non-leadership experiences, so traveling to Israel. You can go on March of the Living, so experiencing what it was like in the Holocaust and experiencing all those different places in Poland and Israel. And then they also have on-campus experiences where you can travel to the University of Michigan and learn about different leadership experiences in the business side. So they really encompass everything. And they have something for you. And then additionally, they just have touristy things, so traveling to Europe, Asia, Central America, South America, a bunch of different places to really experience something that you enjoy. So some of the movement initiatives that the International Board creates and implements through all of its teams that are involved with BBYO is they send students to the APAC Policy Conference in Washington, D.C. for the high school summit. They have Fall Fest, so bringing back all the participants of BBYO for another fun academic year. They have Game Changer grants where teens can apply to win tens and thousands of dollars to implement large-scale programs throughout their chapter or their region. So they have a bunch of different campaigns and initiatives that go on, which really make it a unique experience. So just kind of some testimonies. So this right here is Ethan Goldie. He's actually a local resident in Okemos. He was just elected as the 95th International President of AZA, but he also served this past year as the first ever Grand Alef Gizbor, which is basically just international treasurer. So the reason why he joined BBYO is because it allowed him to be in such an inclusive environment. It allowed him to meet all of his friends, meet his brothers that he'll be friends with for the rest of his life. So he really likes wearing the letters of the Aleph Zadik Aleph, and it's just a really great experience. So Ethan will actually be taking a gap year next year to travel the world to spread BBYO and enhance the leadership opportunities within each of the regions and councils, things of that sort. So now I want to talk about the Friends and Alumni Network. So the Friends and Alumni Network is a really great way, once you're an alumni, to still be involved with BBYO. So some of the things that you can do with being in a Friends and Alumni Network is you can become an advisor of a chapter, leading those teams through the different leadership opportunities. You can also work for BBYO, which is a really great opportunity. And additionally, the Friends and Alumni Network also explore different events, they host different events for alumni to get together and reconnect, so it's a really great experience. So now I pose the big question of why should we care? Why should all of us in this room care about BBYO and enhancing the Jewish community? And why should everyone else in the Metro Detroit and global Jewish community care about this? So here's some of the other research that I did. So I asked the participants of my survey of how much they're engaged with Jewish organizations post-schooling. So engaged with their local Hillel on campus, engaged with Birthright, engaged with other fellowships and internships, things like that. So these were the results. The fact that the majority of it was kind of a 5, I'm kind of engaged, but I'm kind of not, was really interesting because, you would think that most people would be engaged with our Hillel, especially Michigan State University's Hillel, with the amount of outreach that they do. But it was kind of alarming because it was a 5. It's only in the middle. So that was one thing that really stood out to me. So I kind of asked the questions, I kind of asked other people is, what are our Jewish organizations doing in our local and global community to engage with all these Jewish teens? And what does engagement look like in the community, and who are they engaging with? Some of the other research that I did is, sorry, that was the same one. So the other question that I asked is, what are the chances of you traveling to Israel, your post-schooling career after college, or even during college? And all the results pointed to 10 out of 10, yes, I will be traveling to Israel. So then I kind of thought to myself, kind of took a breath and said, okay, looks like our Jewish community is really doing and putting in a lot of efforts to send students to Israel. Again, with Birthright, a free 10-day trip to Israel. Is just one example, but there are so many different mission trips and so many different opportunities for you to travel to Israel. So that was really something that was really great to see, is that most students, if not all of them, according to the survey, want to travel to Israel or have been to Israel. So then I asked alumni who are currently in college how engaged they are on campus. And most of them said that they are engaged. A little said that they aren't so engaged, but that's just kind of the culture and the Jewish life of how it is on their campus. But most students did say that they are engaged on campus, which was really great, which means they're getting involved, really trying to both up their Jewish life and additionally enhance it for others. So that was great seeing that as well. I asked the question, what students who plan on working for a Jewish organization post-schooling career. That was a little interesting to see because, again, it's kind of like the result previous, is that it's only 5 in the middle. So, and it definitely could happen, but at the same time, it may or may not happen. But that brought up a concern for me, is because, if you want to enhance the Jewish community, one step to doing that is working for a Jewish organization or making your mark on the Jewish community, kind of getting involved. So that's how I took this question, is that they may or may not want to be involved, but they're unsure. So that kind of poses the question is, again, stating back to what it was earlier, is where is our Jewish community at? So that's kind of the question that I still pose today, is where is our Jewish community at? And what is it doing to amplify it and ensure that it's healthy for everybody? So I hope you enjoyed my presentation, kind of a little bit inside BBYO, but as you can see, BBYO really has made an impact on myself as well as other people within the Jewish community. So thank you, appreciate it.